Hi, I'm Eric Enslen. Many of you probably know my wife, Brooke. She's the beekeeper. Um, but we had our first real honey harvest this year, and so we had to make labels for the first time. And so when Janet asked for people with some recent experience making labels, so I'm going to walk you through how we came up with our honey label, and then at the end, I'll give you some alternatives if our methods don't sound like they'd work for you. Um, so first thing we wanted to do was make a logo. This is a picture that my wife took shortly after we moved into our farm, and this is what inspired her idea for our logo. So this is the mock-up that she drew. She said she wanted to invert the colors of the rainbow and have the red of the barn be the central color. And so eventually, this is what I came up with. Um, so the next thing we wanted to do was find a jar. These are the four that we liked the most after looking around online. We asked friends and families for their opinion, and eventually we picked this one on the right here. So the next thing we wanted to do was, it's a 12-ounce jar. Um, the next thing we wanted to do is understand what are the requirements around labeling. I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice, but the general guidelines that I found were the label needs to include a common name, honey, pollen. If it's more complex than just honey, if it's hot honey or something like that, you need an ingredient list, you need your physical address, and the net weight. That's about it. There's also this general recommendation not to make outrageous claims of what the honey will do. But even saying not to feed to infants is optional. And there's also this program in Pennsylvania called PA Preferred. You need to apply for that if you want to use that. I haven't done that, so I don't know too much about it, but I'm sure some people in the club have and could tell you more about it. So knowing all this, I still wasn't really inspired with what I wanted our label to look like. And so, but we had a bunch of other honey that we've bought various people's honey over the years, and we still had most of those jars. So I just looked at what we had laying around the house. So this is the first one that we had. We bought this at the University of Delaware. They use the phrase locally produced honey. And I put this piece of paper in here to take this picture because the thing that the biggest takeaway for us from this label was that blue text on a clear label, really hard to read, especially when it was full of honey. It was full of very dark fall honey. There was almost no contrast. The next one, George might recognize. The black label, black on a clear label, much easier to read. He used the phrase raw honey, and then I don't think you had the weight on the label itself, but it's embossed into the back of the glass, which I assume is good enough. The next one, my mom picked this up in Greece, so probably doesn't comply with a lot of American rules, but they used the phrase premium organic honey. They had this really nice embossed gold on a white label, which I thought looked cool, but probably hard to do DIY. This one I think is also a club member. I picked this bottle up at a gas station. They use the phrase pure and raw honey. This is the only one that I saw with a nutritional facts label, but it was not any complicated recipe. It was just honey. It was also the only one that included the warning, not suitable for children under 1 year old. And then this I haven't actually scanned the QR code, but I assume, and a lot of them did include website links as well. If you have a website, I would definitely put that on the label. This one I got from a friend in California. I don't know if his family actually sells their honey, but this was the only one that just said honey. And they also wrote the year on, which I kind of like. So we might do that in future years. So now I had some better ideas of what I wanted the label to look like. As a reminder, this was the jar that we picked, and I needed measurements of that space that oval in the front of the jar, and it's kind of hard to measure a curved surface. So what I decided to do was wrap a piece of paper around the label and do a rubbing, and then scan that paper with a scanner. And from that, so this was that scan. From that, I got the measurements. I use this website, Photopia. It's basically Photoshop. It's got a very similar interface to Photoshop. If you're familiar with Photoshop, it'll feel very familiar. But you could use basically any image editing program. So as a reminder, I had to scan. I turned that into, go to the next slide, a better clean outline of that oval. And then because we had this semicircular logo, I thought that should just go right at the top. It fits right in the oval. So then we needed to say honey. We kind of liked the phrase raw honey, and then put on the weight label, and then put on our address. And we also liked the not suitable for children under 1 year old. So we put all that at the bottom. We tried playing around with different sizes. We tried adding a picture of a bee. We tried different fonts. We tried different pictures of bees. We tried a whole bunch of different things, and keep going. So I think, yeah, you can see a bunch of different iterations that we took trying to come up with them here. One more. Okay. Yeah, I think you can go to the next one. So now we wanted to make them. So we have an inkjet printer, and we also have this vinyl cutter. Our vinyl cutter is Cricut brand. Go to the next one. There's other brands as well, like Silhouette. You don't need one of these, but for if you are trying to cut out a complex shape, they're perfect for it. You might know somebody who has one. If you didn't, now you do. Go to the next slide. So when you go to use the vinyl cutter to cut out things that you print, it has this print then cut function. So it'll print it on a sheet with these black tick marks in the corner. And go to the next slide. So when you put it in the vinyl cutter, it will measure, and then there's this little scanner head on it. It will scan for those tick marks to find exactly where you positioned this sheet on the cutting mat. And then if you go to the next slide, this is it cutting. After it's measured, it's got a little X-Acto knife head basically, and it just goes around and cuts out all of these shapes. So if you go to the next slide, you can print almost anything on one of these. So this was the first batch of different iterations that we did, and I didn't want to cut up expensive sticker paper, so this is just regular printer paper. We cut out these different designs and shopped them around friends and family, and eventually we decided on this design. So then we needed to actually make real labels of this. So if you go to the next one, Cricut makes a bunch of different types of sticker paper. There's clear and white, there's matte and glossy, there's waterproof and not waterproof. So we tried a bunch of them because they were half off when we were shopping around. So we made up with basically every type of sticker paper that we tried. And then the one all the way on the right was when I tried a two-part label because the colors kind of get washed out on the clear. And so once again, we shopped these around friends and family, and eventually we, every single one of those, we printed like 9 labels. So this year we're using all of them, but I think we're kind of tending towards the white, but they look pretty good on the light honey. On the darker honey, I'm not sure how well the clear would look. So that's not really the end of the story. There's still lots of iterations that we can make. One of the early things that I noticed, if you go to the next slide, print settings matter a lot. This might be hard to see on the projector, I'm not really sure, but in person it was a pretty dramatic difference how much lighter the one on the left is. And the only difference in print settings here was one, I told the printer that it was glossy paper and the other was matte paper. And it just dumps a ton more ink if it thinks it's glossy paper. These are the print settings when you're printing through Cricut. By default, it always wants to add this thing called bleed, which is really intended for stickers, not labels. Bleed is like it pulls the colors out in the edge to make sure that there's not a sliver of white at the edge of your sticker, but it will probably screw up your label. So I always recommend turning bleed off and then also using the system dialog, basically the reverse of its default options. And then within the system dialog, if you go into the preferences, I think it's important that you always set the quality settings to high, if you keep skipping through here, and the paper type to match whatever type of paper you're printing on, whether it's glossy or matte, because that really does make a big difference. The next idea that we had, because I liked this picture of the bee, but that ultimately got voted out of the main label, was to put the season on the lid. So the bee picture did eventually make it back in. So we've been putting those on the lids of all of them. And then I noticed pretty early on that the glossy paper can smudge if you don't give it like literally hours and hours to dry. And also you can see that the clear pulls up a little bit at the edges. So eventually I scaled the whole image down a little bit and it fits much better. It doesn't rub up against the rim at the edge of that oval. Then the last thing I think after this is, if you go to the next one, a lot of people think that the Cricut brand sticker paper is terrible. So I found this brand on Amazon, Koala. This is the latest thing I was just trying earlier this week. and I've been a lot happier with it. It's much cheaper, and it also sticks a lot better than the Cricut paper did. So that's basically been our process, but you might not know Photoshop. I don't think that matters too much. If you're familiar with any presentation tools like PowerPoint or Google Slides, those are great for making labels. What I would probably do is make one label on a slide, get it how you're happy with it, and then take a screenshot of it and crop that and copy it into like Word and make a bunch of copies on it on one page. And then, but another idea that I had is if you've got good handwriting, or if you know somebody who's into calligraphy or something, you could probably hand write your label, scan it, and then print copies of it. There's a lot of different ways that you could go about it. If you go to the next one, if you don't have a printer, obviously you could use a friend's, you could use a local print shop. If you don't have an inkjet printer, there are sticker papers that are compatible with laser printers. I didn't know that going into this. I probably would have preferred to have a laser printer, but most sticker papers are meant specifically for inkjet printers. And then if you don't have a vinyl cutter, you could cut by hand, especially if it's a simple shape. If you have, go to the next slide, if you have one of these things and you're looking to make like a rectangular label, you could get pretty precise cuts with that. You could use a print shop, or you could use pre-cut label sheets. And if you were going to do that, obviously you'd want to find one that fits your jar pretty well. And then you could do some test prints on a regular, cheap printer paper and line it up with the label to get the alignment right. I think that's the last one. Yeah. So if you have any other questions, or if you want to see any of these examples of labels, I have brought all of them with me. If you want to come see me after. Yeah. Koala. Koala. K-O-A-L-A.
Koala like bears.
Yeah.
I walked away for a second. You talked about the different programs for doing your layouts and all.
I didn't go extensively into it. Do you have recommendations?
Right?
Yeah.
Did you talk about the free ones that are out there in case people don't want to pay for Photoshop?
Yeah, I don't have Photoshop. I use a website called Photopia that's got a very similar.
Like if you want a program, there's one called Inkscape, which does vector graphics, which is good for signage, any kind of thing like that. And then there's
what's it called?
Inkscape.
Inkscape.
Inkscape, and then the other one's called again.
Anybody know what vector is? So I work Photoshop. I'm a photographer, right? So Larissa asked me to get the logo and separate it from the white background. The vector is actually a drawing of artwork, and it's not attached to the background. So there are separately any background. So vector drawings are a big thing for labels.
Yeah, they're cool because they're not based on pixels. They're based on the math of the shapes. So you could scale it down to a button, and you could scale it up to a billboard, and it would look crisp at any size.
So what you just said, it was free.
Yeah, Inkscape's free. You have to
Inkscape.
have to learn it. Like every program you gotta learn it. And it can take time. I was lucky enough to know Photoshop before I got into that, so it came easy. But if you're just starting out with it, you're gonna have a little bit of a challenge to figure it out.
Anybody else have questions? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Once you get to the design, there are lots of third-party people that make it. I use Sticker Mule.
Sticker Mule.
But when you're making fun of something, you're not going to do it.
For sure. Yeah.
You want to go to something Sticker Mule.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think the DIY stuff is particularly good your first time around and when it's small production, because you can iterate on it, you can figure out what you like. Once you're happy with the label and your honey production is high, it'll get tiring cutting 9 at a time.
Did you register your label?
I did not. Is there a
People do that. They repair. Somebody else trademark on you?
Yeah, you can trademark the name, but you can register the copyright of the image. And so I just looked at it earlier this week. I didn't get I think it's $45. And is it important? I don't know. Is it important to me? I don't know. Is it important to George? Absolutely. Or George. Or George, yeah.
cool? Thanks, everyone.
I know how the part is not gonna be that expensive. So how am I going a simpler way to keep the labels? I'm kind of interested in how we like it. Okay.
Just leave it right there.
The easiest way is obviously the bee supply places sell labels. I think they print your name and address on it. That's got a design. That's probably the easiest. I found some software for Avery labels and used it. And then I was able to save the file and take it to Staples once I figured out what size label. And they were able to print a whole bunch of them, pretty well, I think cheaper probably than I could have printed them in color, and that worked out really well. So I've been doing that. I started out with all in one piece. I had to cut them out, but it was really hard to peel them. So this is actually the hardest part was figuring out the size label to get, and then just match the design and was able to tells you how many you want per page and all that stuff. So
You want the pre-made labels, right? And then you size your artwork to go to the label.
exactly. And in the software, it said that you select what Avery style label you want to fit on.
I just wanted to provide.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a question online. Keep moving. I wanted to score the center again. There's a question. Monica, you're up, so come on out. Thanks, Howard. There's a question from online about smearing.
We got two questions. Hang on a second. We got a question online.
Online question is, I'm using the Avery labels and they're smearing. And so one of the answers is, depends on what you're printing them with. I've found that the LaserJet printers tend to smear more, especially if you try to use them immediately. Come right out of the printer, put them on, and look at your thumb, and it's black because you smudged that laser printer stuff off. Let it sit for about 24 hours. You got a better chance of it not smudging. I started using my LaserJet printer, and again, let it sit for a few hours, and it seems to work a lot better. It doesn't smear as much. Then there was another question.
So when you go to Staples, do you have to bring all the labels with you?
I was trying to remember, I think that's USB drive.
Yeah. And then they just get your sheet down, charge you for sheet.
Right.
Okay, good.
But I found some of those. It's Howard's Honey. The only thing about city is put a picture on it. Some people say, well, you got to
On that smeary label situation, that happened with me as well, and I printed out too many and couldn't stop it, and I got that crystal clear spray Krylon and gave it a quick wrap so it gave it a seal, but